Welcome to all of you. It's a very auspicious day, a very auspicious event. In fact, we are completing 125 years of the foundation of the Ramakrishna Mission. And 1st May 1897, which happens to be the foundation day of the Ramakrishna Mission, is being celebrated all over the world. This is a global movement, as all of you know. Ramakrishna Math and Ramakrishna Mission, they are worldwide, non-political, non-sectarian spiritual organizations. And they've been engaging in various forms of humanitarian activities for the last 125 years. Now, inspired by the ideals of renunciation and service, both the monks and the lay devotees of the Math and Mission, they serve millions of men, women and children, because they try to see the living God in them. That's the central core of the Ramakrishna Mission or the Ramakrishna movement's philosophy. So many of the centers, especially in the West, are centers of Ramakrishna Math. And though Ramakrishna Math and Mission are legally and financially separate entities, they are closely interrelated in several ways. So we can regard them as twin organizations. So these twin organizations, if you see, have set in motion, as I said, a non-sectarian, universal spiritual movement, which has been silently working for more than 125 years now to catalyze the spiritual regeneration of humanity. That is the primary motive. All the humanitarian activities are colored or maybe tinged with this catalyst, the spiritual regeneration of humanity. That is the primary goal. So our Ramakrishna Vedanta Centre UK, which was started in 1948 in the UK, and it will be completing 75 years soon. So we are happy to conduct this 3-day webinar to commemorate the 125 years of the foundation of Ramakrishna Mission, where 9 distinguished monks of our order, working in different countries of the world, in almost all the major continents of the world. We have North America, South America, Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia, Asia, and many other places. So our aim, they will share their thoughts. They are exceptionally good speakers. And our aim is to give a bird's eye view of how the movement unfolded, this Ramakrishna movement unfolded in these continents, to create a truly global movement with the help of the eternal and universal values practiced and preached by its founders over the last 125 years. It's a very momentous event. So the story of this Ramakrishna Math and Mission, I would not like to call it a history, because history deals with the outer happenings of men's and institutions, the statistics, the type of work done. So there is a tendency to quantify the work done. It's not the quantity that is important. The story of the Ramakrishna Mission or the Ramakrishna movement is a story which deals with the inner dynamics of a movement. That is more important. It is the unfolding of a truth, a power through men and institutions, inspired by, of course, Sri Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna, after whom the organization is named in his honor by Swami Vivekananda, it came with a message, a new set of ideas suited to the needs of the present age. The ideas, the values are eternal, no doubt. All the scriptures, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Bible, all the religions speak of certain eternal values. But a new set of ideas are required, and these prophets and incarnations come over a period of several centuries. If you see, every 500 years, as Swami Vivekananda said, a great wave comes, and they practice these eternal values suited to the needs of the present age, of that age. So we'll see Sri Ramakrishna first applied these values, eternal values, in his own life and charged it with power. So he trained a group of young disciples to be the torch bearers. The chief for the main was Swami Vivekananda and his Guru Bhais, the monastic disciples. Of course, when the Ramakrishna Mission was founded, It was a combined effort. In the first meeting, you will find a lot of householder devotees as well. So subsequently, you see, after 1st May 1897, through the disciples of those direct disciples and through successive generations of disciples, both monastic as well as householders, the message and power of Sri Ramakrishna has been spreading in ever widening circles to form what we may term as the Ramakrishna movement, not just the mission, because Mutt is also a part. So now we will begin without taking much time. I would like the speakers to share their wonderful thoughts. They are all, as I said, speaking from different parts of the globe, representing, as it were, and trying to give a bird's eye view of the movement as it unfolded itself in the different continents. So we'll have a wonderful global approach to how this Ramakrishna mission works, a global approach to understand from the monks who have been working and living in these different areas in different corners of the world. So we begin our first session. We begin with Swami Medhananda, who is a senior research fellow of philosophy at the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Moral and Spiritual Education. In short, it is known as RIMSE. It's a pioneering institution in Mysuru. And he will be speaking, of course, as the topic has been announced, the cosmopolitan ideals of the Ramakrishna Mission. So I'll give a brief introduction to Swami Medhananda, who is a great scholar as well academically. He was born and raised in Boston, USA. In 2009, he received his PhD in German philosophy from the University of California, Berkeley. He was also a student at Oxford University and also a Fulbright scholar at Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany after that. Later on, he received spiritual initiation in 2009 from revered Swami Swahanandaji Maharaj at the Vedanta Society of Southern California in Hollywood. And then, with the blessings of his guru, he joined the Ramakrishna order. He came to join the Ramakrishna order. And after a 6-month-long pilgrimage, that's what monks usually do. They first familiarize themselves by a pilgrimage where they just wander. And he joined the order at Vivekananda University in Belur Math, where he served as an associate professor for, I think, associate professor, yes, and head of the program in philosophy from 2010 to 2021. So 10 long years he served in our Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda University. Since April of this year, he has been serving in the Mysuru Ashrama in Karnataka as a senior research fellow in philosophy at the Ramakrishna Institute of Moral and Spiritual Education, as I told you before. Now, he has been appointed to the Vedanta Society of Southern California in Hollywood, where he will move in August 2022. Till then, he is in Mysuru. So his current research, if you see the research which he has done, he has written 2 wonderful books. One of the books, both the books were published by Oxford University Press, and he'll be coming soon to United Kingdom. There are some events lined up for him in the UK as well, and Oxford as well as Birmingham. But his current research focuses on Vedantic philosophical traditions, cross-cultural philosophy of religion, philosophy of consciousness, and then you will see there are he deals with the philosophies not only of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, but also Aurobindo. He is the author of 3 books, the last one of which is Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. That is Oxford University Press, 2022. It has been published recently. But before that, he wrote a wonderful book, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, Sri Ramakrishna and Cross-Cultural Philosophy of Religion. Again, this book, which is widely acclaimed, has been published by Oxford University Press a few years earlier in 2018. Then, of course, he has written several research papers on in many subjects, and is also the editor of the Bloomsbury Research Handbook of Vedanta. This is quite an achievement in 2020, as it's, and the co-editor with Benedict Paul Goke of Panentheism in Indian and Western Thought, Cosmopolitan Interventions, which is under this book is being published. And he is also the editor of 2 special issues of International Journal of Hindu Studies, and one on Swami Vivekananda as a cosmopolitan thinker. This is in progress, this volume. And he has published more than 30 articles in internationally acclaimed academic journal. So without taking much time, I would request Swami Medhananda to begin his talk on the topic, the cosmopolitan ideals of the Ramakrishna Mission. Over to Swami Medhananda.
Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharini. My humble pranams to revered Swami Sarvasthanandaji Maharaj for the very generous introduction and for kindly inviting me to this very exciting program, this 3-day program on this very auspicious day. As revered Maharaj mentioned, I'll be speaking on the theme of the cosmopolitan ideals of the Ramakrishna Mission. So I thought I'd begin by discussing how Swami Vivekananda's cosmopolitan journey began. His journey began shortly after the passing of his Guru Shri Ramakrishna in 1886, as you all know. After that, he wandered throughout India. So the first step in his cosmopolitan journey was to step outside of West Bengal and to wander barefoot as a sannyasin throughout India, the length and breadth of India, going to the Himalayas, going to South India, all over India, speaking to people from all walks of life, from beggars up to the Maharajas, the wealthiest people in the country. And he got a very, very deep and profound understanding of both the strengths and the weaknesses and the needs of his mother India. But that was just the beginning of his cosmopolitan journey. In 1893, as we all know, he traveled to the US and he gave a series of extremely famous speeches in the world's Parliament of Religions in Chicago in the US, which made him famous almost overnight. And he spent a number of years in the US and also in England and other European countries. Then he came back to India in 1896. And as revered Maharaj mentioned, in 1897, 1st May, on this very day, he founded the Ramakrishna Mission. And the motto that he coined for the Ramakrishna Mission is extremely important, and it has great depth to it. So in a sense, my entire lecture will be a kind of prolonged meditation on the meaning of the Sanskrit motto that Swami Vivekananda coined for the Ramakrishna Mission. What is that motto? Most of you know this. The motto of the Ramakrishna Mission is Atmano Mokshartham Jagad Hitaya Cha. It has 2 parts. Atmano Mokshartham, for our own spiritual enlightenment or liberation. And the second part is Jagad Hitaya Cha, and for the welfare of humanity. Now notice that the cosmopolitanism of the Ramakrishna Mission is built into the motto. The motto is not Atmano Mokshatam Bharata Varsha Hitaya Cha. It's Jagad Hitaya Cha. The word Jagat is extremely important here. This is a global spiritual organization meant for the welfare of all of humanity, without exception, not just India or Indians. And if you study the works of Swami Vivekananda carefully, you'll find that one of the keynotes in his writings and in his speeches is a deeply cosmopolitan mindset. I'll give you just a few examples. he says in one place, Vivekananda says, I belong as much to India as to the world. No humbug about that. Now, what does cosmopolitan mean? Etymologically, cosmopolitan consists of two words, cosmos, which means the universe or the world, and polis here, politan, means a citizen. So the meaning, the literal meaning of a cosmopolitan is somebody who is a citizen, not of any particular country, but a citizen of the entire world, of the entire universe. And Vivekananda says this again and again. So he says, I belong as much to India as to the world. No humbug about that. He says in another place, truth is my God, the universe, my country. Again, this is a direct expression of his cosmopolitanism. The universe is his country, not just India, but the whole universe. And in another place, in a very interesting letter, he wrote, what am I? Asiatic, European, or American? I feel a curious medley of personalities in me. It's a very beautiful statement, actually. After having traveled throughout the world to different Western countries, having lived in India, he comes back and he says, I can't honestly say anymore. Am I Indian? Am I Asian? Am I a Westerner? Am I an American? Am I a European? I'm a medley of all of these things. That, again, is a very cosmopolitan attitude. Now, what I want to explore in today's lecture is how Swami Vivekananda framed and structured the Ramakrishna Mission along cosmopolitan lines. And I wanted to explore in particular 3 dimensions of the cosmopolitan outlook of the Ramakrishna Mission. Number 1, as revered Sarvasthananji Maharaj mentioned just now, we have Vedanta societies throughout the world, in almost every continent. And he, as he beautifully put it, the main aim of our centers outside of India is to catalyze the spiritual regeneration of humanity. That's a very nice way of putting it. What I wanted to emphasize is the flip side of the same coin, which is that it's a two-way street. And we have centers outside of India, not only to spread the message of Vedanta throughout the world, but in order for us to learn from other countries. That's another very, very important aspect of the cosmopolitan mission of the Ramakrishna tradition. Swamiji says again and again, Swami Vivekananda emphasizes again and again, we have many, many things to learn from other countries. I'll just mention a few examples. So he says, this is, by the way, so this is the new book that has just been published, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. And I begin the book with the quotation. This is from a letter written to his brother disciple, Swami Akhandanandaji, in 1890. He said it in Bangla. I'll read the Bangla and then I'll translate it. Swami Vivekananda says, Amar motto ei je, jekhane jaha kichu uttom pai, tahai shikkha koribo. My motto is to learn whatever is great wherever I may find it. This was his his life philosophy. And he learned this directly from Sri Ramakrishna, because Sri Ramakrishna famously said in Bangla, Javat bachi tavat shiki. As long as I live, so long do I learn. And Swamiji expanded this teaching to encompass all of humanity. And the way he put it is this. He says that every country has a particular ideal. He says, this is from his lecture, Women of India, delivered in 1900 in the West. He said, to understand a nation, you must first understand its ideal. This is something he says again and again. Every single country on this earth has a particular ideal. So in 1898, he says in one place that the ideal of the West is truth, and the ideal of the East is chastity, brahmacharya. Now you might be thinking, many of you are Indians living in India or NRIs, non-resident Indians living in other countries. You might think to yourself, wait a minute, but why should truth only be the ideal of the West? Truth should also be the ideal of India. It's found in all of the Hindu scriptures, starting from the Upanishads, but also in the Bhagavad Gita, also in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. It's all over the place, Satyam, along with Ahimsa and Brahmacharya. But there's a deeper point behind what Swamiji is saying. Swamiji, of course, was, he had basically memorized the Hindu scriptures. It's not that he didn't know. He was fully aware that one of the great spiritual ideals of India was also truthfulness. But what he meant is that truthfulness is practiced on a larger scale and more widely in the West than in India, ironically. So it seems to me that what he's saying is that the West is able to practice truthfulness more effectively than India. And therefore, India has something very important to learn from Western countries, and vice versa. The ideal of India, he says, is chastity, brahmacharya. And in the West, that's not practiced so well. So the West has that very important lesson to learn from India. So he was very, very balanced. That was part of his cosmopolitan attitude, is that there's something very great about every country in this world. And therefore, we have something to learn from every country. And in an 1895 letter to another one of his monastic brother disciples, Swami Ramakrishna Shashi Maharaj, Vivekananda says, had I the money, I would send each one of you to travel all over the world. No great idea can have a place in the heart unless one steps out of his little corner. This is another wonderful statement. Swamiji, in other places, he says, we shouldn't be like frogs in a well. You know, the frog in the well thinks that his whole world is this well. There's nothing greater than this well. If he could only get out of that well for a few moments, then he'll realize there's a vast ocean outside of my well. So for that reason, he said, I wish if I had the money, I would send each one of you all over the world because it expands your mind. And I wanted to give a couple concrete examples. Revered Swami Suhitanandaji Maharaj, he's one of the vice presidents of our order, a very senior, highly respected monk of our order. He was general secretary of our order a number of years ago. And I was speaking to him a few years ago. We went for a walk together. And this walk happened just after Swami Suhitanandaji had returned from a tour of the US and Australia, I believe, and Japan also. He visited a few countries outside of India in his capacity as general secretary, visiting different centers in different countries. And then he came back to Bilurmat. And during this walk, he told me some very interesting things, which I think really exemplifies the cosmopolitan outlook of our order. So he told me that when he visited Japan, one thing really struck him. He was walking on the street, just an ordinary street in Japan. And he noticed an extremely old Japanese lady walking on the other side of the street. She might have been about 90 years old, extremely old. She could barely walk. She was walking with a limp and very, very slowly. And what he saw, to his astonishment, is that she noticed a small piece of trash, of litter, a number of yards away from where she was standing. And so she took great pains to walk very, very slowly with great difficulty to that piece of litter, that piece of trash. And then she bent over very slowly. She picked up the trash, then walked all the way to the wastebasket, the public wastebasket, and she threw it in the wastebasket. And that struck him. And he said, Indians have a lot to learn from Japan, because in Japan, they have this civic sense. They have this idea that this is our country and we should all work toward keeping it clean, keeping it hospitable for everybody. Now, recently, Narendra Modi has instituted this program, Swachh Bharat. So this is something that we can learn from other countries. That's one thing that Swami Suhitanandaji mentioned to me a few years ago. And he gave another example. After visiting the US, what he noticed is when he visited people's homes, even in our own Vedanta societies, what he noticed is that people are much more self-reliant in Western countries. They don't have a driver. They don't have a cook. You know, you have to drive yourself. You have to do your own grocery shopping. You have to laundry your own clothes. You have to clean your own house. You have to clean your own bathrooms. And he said, this is a wonderful thing, this self-reliance. This is something that we can learn, that we Indians can learn from Western countries. So these are two small examples. A third example is that another thing that he really loved about the Western countries is that he saw that there's a health consciousness, that people, it's just part of the culture to do daily exercise, to watch what they eat. And so what he did when he came back to Bilurmat, we have a large cafeteria for the many hundreds of monks in Bilurmat. And he posted a menu giving health recommendations. So, you know, these are the foods that you should avoid. These are the foods which you should eat more of. You should do daily exercise, these kinds of things. And so this is a good example of one of our own senior swamis, the general secretary of our order, who, after having traveled to different countries throughout the world, he came back to India with a new cosmopolitan outlook, and he was able to implement and try to put into practice some of the great lessons that he learned from other countries, some of the great ideals that other countries have placed before us. So it seems to me that when Swamiji says, Atmano mokshartham jagadhitayacha, one aspect of what he's saying is that there are two levels. There's the organizational level, the level at which the Ramakrishna Mission itself, as a spiritual global organization, can benefit, can enrich itself, can expand itself, can make itself more effective and more powerful by learning from other countries. And at the individual level, each one of us, as monks, as householder devotees, as spiritual aspirants, can enrich our spiritual lives. We can deepen our spiritual lives. We can become more broad-minded and more accepting of other standpoints and other religions by learning from the ideals of the various countries in this world. And I wanted to also mention in this regard a really remarkable statement he made in one of his lectures from Colombo to Almora. This is in 1897, after he returned from his first trip to the West. He said, "To become broad, to go out, to amalgamate, to universalize is the end of our aims. With all my love for India and with all my patriotism and veneration for the ancients, I cannot but think that we have to learn many things from other nations. We must be always ready to sit at the feet of all, for mark you, everyone can teach us great lessons. We cannot do without the world outside India. It was our foolishness that we thought we could, and we have paid the penalty by about 1,000 years of slavery. That we did not go out to compare things with other nations, did not mark the workings that have been all around us, has been the one great cause of this degradation of the Indian mind. We have paid the penalty. Let us do it no more." This is a really astonishing statement. He would make these really sweeping and profound historical statements, these kind of prophetic statements once in a while. And of course, Swamiji said this in 1897 during the British colonial rule of India. And he's saying that one of the main reasons for India's slavery at the hands of both Muslim and later the British conquerors is that they refused to be cosmopolitan. They were too inward looking, too much like a navel gazing race. They weren't interested in learning from other nations and exposing themselves to ideas from other countries. And that was one of the main reasons for India's downfall. So one of the main things he emphasized in the Ramakrishna Mission is to be as broad and as cosmopolitan as possible. So this is the first of the three cosmopolitan dimensions of the Ramakrishna Mission. The second dimension is what I would call the religious and social cosmopolitanism of the Ramakrishna Mission. What do I mean by that? I'm sure many of you have interacted with a number of the monks of our order. What you'll find is that we don't just have Hindu monks, we have Christian monks, we have Muslim monks, we have Jaina monks, we have monks from many different religions, and we're all children of Sri Ramakrishna, and nobody makes any kind of distinctions between the different monks. We have monks from all castes in our pre-monastic lives, whatever caste we were, that's completely irrelevant. The moment you join the order, you become the same caste, the Ramakrishna caste. That's the only caste that matters. These are ways that Swamiji insisted that we be as broad as possible and not adhere to the kind of socially rigid customs of Hinduism. And of course, this cosmopolitan outlook, this religious cosmopolitanism, this social broad-mindedness, this can be traced to Swami Vivekananda's guru, Sri Ramakrishna. As almost all of us know, Sri Ramakrishna was a great religious cosmopolitan. He practiced many spiritual disciplines within Hindu traditions, but he also practiced Christianity, and he realized God as Christ. He had a spiritual experience of Christ as an incarnation who then merged into his own body. And then he went into samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna also practiced Islam, and he realized Allah, also in a state of samadhi. And he practiced many different Hindu disciplines, Vaishnavism, Shaktism, Advaita Vedanta, and a number of other Hindu disciplines. So he is the ideal exemplar of a religious cosmopolitan. And of course, on the basis of his many spiritual practices and spiritual experiences, he taught Joto Mot Toto Pot, as many faiths, so many paths. And another one of my favorite teachings of his is Tini Ananto Patho Ananto. God is infinite, and the paths to God are infinite. And Swami Vivekananda, when he taught the harmony of religions in Western countries, he basically just tried to translate into modern language exactly what Sri Ramakrishna taught. So this is what he said in one place. He said, Swami Vivekananda said, the Vedanta is the rationale of all religions. Without the Vedanta, every religion is superstition. With Vedanta, everything becomes religion. So this is a very important statement. Remember that most of the societies outside of India of the Ramakrishna Mission are called Vedanta societies, and that's very important. I think it would be best to think of the Ramakrishna Mission not so much as a Hindu organization, so much as a global Vedantic organization. It's a Vedantic organization. What does Vedanta mean? What Swamiji meant by Vedanta is that it's the philosophical basis of all the world religions. But what is the philosophy of Vedanta according to Swami Vivekananda? I wanted to explain this briefly. If you want more details, you can look at my new book, especially chapters 1 through 3. So I want to point to 4 main doctrines of Swami Vivekananda's philosophy of Vedanta, which he called the universal religion. So what is this universal religion of Vedanta? The first doctrine of Vedanta, according to Swamiji, is that God, the ultimate reality, is both personal and impersonal. He says in one place that we Hindus teach a personal, impersonal God. And he says this in many, many places. He's just following his Guru Sri Ramakrishna, who often taught in Bangla, Brahmo Shakti Abhed, which means that Nirguna Brahman, the impersonal, non-dual Brahman, is inseparable from Shakti, by which Sri Ramakrishna meant the personal God, who the loving God who creates this world and looks over us. And the second doctrine is that the goal of life is to realize God. However we like to think of God. We might like to think of God as non-dual Brahman. We might like to think of God as Kali or as Shiva or as Krishna or as Christ or as Allah. That doesn't matter. Because remember, the first doctrine says that there's only one God who manifests to different people in infinite forms and in infinite aspects. So it's the same God, but who manifests to each one of us in different ways, depending on our own preferences and our own spiritual practices. But the goal for every one of us is to realize God in some form or aspect. So that's the second doctrine of Vedanta, according to Swami Vivekananda. The third doctrine is that there are 4 main paths to realizing God. These are called what he calls the 4 yogas. And I assume all of you know this, but Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless action, Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, and Raja Yoga, the yoga of concentration and meditation. And this is what he says. This is his way of explaining the third doctrine of Vedanta. Vivekananda says, each one of our yogas, each one of these 4 yogas is fitted to make man perfect, even without the help of the others, because they have all the same goal in view. The yogas of work, Karma Yoga, of wisdom, Jnana Yoga, and of devotion, Bhakti Yoga, are all capable of serving as direct and independent means for the attainment of moksha. It doesn't matter what path you take. It could be the path of bhakti, the path of jnana, the path of karma, or the path of meditation. Each one of these is equally effective in taking you to the goal of God realization. That's the third doctrine of Vedanta. Another way that he puts the same point, this third doctrine, is he says this. This is actually at the very beginning of Raja Yoga, his book Raja Yoga. He says, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work, Karma Yoga, or worship, Bhakti Yoga, or psychic control, Raja Yoga, or philosophy, Jnana Yoga, by one or more or all of these and be free. This is the whole of religion. So that's the third doctrine. Through any one of the 4 yogas, we can attain the goal of God realization. And we can also try to combine the 4 yogas to the best of our ability. That would be even better. And the fourth and final doctrine of Swami Vivekananda's philosophy of Vedanta is that each world religion corresponds to one or more of these 4 yogas. This is a very important doctrine because this is how he arrives at his doctrine of the harmony of religions. Each religion in this world, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, all of these, they correspond to one or more of the 4 yogas. He says this in one of his lectures. He says, all religions have for their object the teaching of devotion, bhakti, or knowledge, jnana, or activity, karma yoga, in a concrete form. Now, the philosophy of Vedanta is the abstract science which embraces all of these methods. And this is what I teach, leaving each one to apply it to his own concrete form. So Swamiji, in just a couple sentences, he captures in a nutshell what is the essence of his Vedanta philosophy. So I hope you can see now how Swamiji arrives at the harmony of all religions. He says that the goal of every single one of us is to realize God. God manifests in many, many different ways to different people throughout the world. There are 4 main yogas that can bring us to the goal of God realization. There's no higher or lower among these yogas. It's not that Jnana Yoga is higher than Bhakti Yoga or Karma Yoga, nothing like that. They're all equally effective. All 4 of these yogas are equally effective in leading to the same goal of God realization. And each one of the world religions corresponds to one or more of these 4 yogas. Therefore, each one of the world religions is equally effective in leading us to salvation. So it's very clear here that Swami Vivekananda was by no means a Hindu supremacist. Some leftist scholars in India and elsewhere, they criticize Swamiji and they say that he was a Hindu supremacist, like Jyotirmaya Sharma. He's a scholar in Hyderabad, I believe. And in one of my articles, he wrote an entire book criticizing Swami Vivekananda and saying he was a Hindu supremacist and the father of Hindu nationalism. So in an article I wrote, I respond to his book and I try to refute his criticisms of Swami Vivekananda. This is something that Jyotirmaya Sharma and these other leftist scholars have completely overlooked, that Swamiji was incredibly cosmopolitan and he never placed Hinduism on a higher footing than any of the other world religions. That's very important to keep in mind. How do we know this? He says it in many places, but one of the most explicit statements he makes is in his lecture on Sri Ramakrishna. It's known as My Master in the Complete Works. He says that every one of the world religions has the same saving power. This is exactly the definition of what's called religious pluralism. This is a term it's a technical term used in the philosophy of religion, very common now, and it's a very hot topic in philosophy of religion and theology. Religious pluralism means not just my religion, but other people's religions are equally effective in leading to salvation. This is a very broad-minded approach to the different world religions. This is called religious pluralism. Swami Vivekananda, following Sri Ramakrishna, were pioneers in teaching a religious pluralism. What is the opposite of this? The opposite of religious pluralism is what's called religious exclusivism. Religious exclusivism is the view that only my religion leads to salvation. None of you, all of you other people, you're not going to reach salvation. You might even go to hell. This is exclusivism, religious exclusivism. And then there's a third position, which is this kind of middle position between religious exclusivism, which is quite fanatical on the one hand, and religious pluralism, which is the most broad-minded, is what's called religious inclusivism. And in ordinary English, inclusivism is a very positive word, but in this context, in this technical sense, it's not so positive. What it means is, my religion is the highest, it's the best religion. It leads most directly to salvation. Other religions are not wrong, they're not totally useless, but they're lower than mine. They're inferior to my religion. So you can see how there's a higher and lower in religious inclusivism. My religion is the best, your religion is not wrong, but it's not as good as my religion. This is religious inclusivism. One example of this religious inclusivist position is the official Catholic view. In the 1960s, the Pope at that time, he wrote an important text in Latin called Nostra Aetate, where he said that Catholicism is the greatest religion. Other religions are not wrong, but they are somehow inferior to, they can also take you to Christ, but in a more indirect manner. Basically, this is the inclusivist position. And on the Indian side, classical Advaita Vedanta can be considered an inclusivist position. Why? If you study the works of Shankara, what you'll find is that Shankaracharya says again and again that there's only one direct path to moksha, to liberation. What is that path? Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. And other paths are not wrong, but they're inferior. They're preparatory disciplines. Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, they can take us part of the way, but they cannot take us all the way to liberation. All these other disciplines they help in purifying our minds, in helping us to concentrate our minds, get rid of unwanted thoughts. But ultimately, we have to stop practicing those other yogas. We have to practice Jnana Yoga, and then finally we will attain liberation. So this is Shankara's classical Advaita Vedanta. And so these are just examples of religious inclusivism. By contrast, both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda taught a very, very broad religious pluralism. The idea is that there's no higher and lower. All the different world religions, all of the different spiritual paths are equally effective in leading to the goal of God realization. And I just wanted to mention also that Swami Vivekananda does something really extraordinary here within the scholarly context of discussions of religious pluralism. He takes religious pluralism one step further than any Western scholars I'm aware of. He embraces what I would call religious cosmopolitanism. And what I mean by that is that, see, religious pluralism means that if I'm Hindu, I'll say, yeah, Christians also can attain God through their path. Muslims can also realize God through Islam. Buddhists can also attain the highest goal of life through the practice of Buddhism. But I'm going to focus on my own religion. I don't really care about those other religions. We can still feel that. Logically, we can still say that. Religious cosmopolitanism means that we don't just accept the equal effectiveness of all the different religions. We actively try to learn from religions other than our own. Where does Swami Vivekananda teach this? He says this, for instance, in one place. It's a very stirring passage. He says, I accept all religions that were in the past and worship with them all. I worship God with every one of them, in whatever form they worship him. I shall go to the mosque of the Mohammed. I shall enter the Christian's church and kneel before the crucifix. I shall enter the Buddhistic temple where I shall take refuge in Buddha and in his law. I shall go into the forest and sit down in meditation with the Hindu who is trying to see the light which enlightens the heart of everyone. So this is very remarkable. He's a Hindu and he's a Vedantin, but he's very happy to learn from other religions, to actually go to mosques and pray to Allah with the Muslims, to go to Christian churches and pray to Jesus and God the Father, to go to Buddhist temples and to worship Buddha and to practice the Noble Eightfold Path. There's another topic that's very widely discussed now among philosophers and theologians. It's called multiple religious belonging. This is the idea that a single person can practice multiple religions. So somebody they can say, I'm not just a Buddhist, but I'm also a Christian. This is actually becoming a more popular position. I'm not just Hindu, I'm also Buddhist. I'm not just Hindu, I'm also Christian. You can come up with different combinations. And again, both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda were pioneers in this idea of multiple religious belonging. And Swami Vivekananda, he once said, he made a very beautiful statement. He said, no man is born to any religion. He has a religion in his own soul. This is a very profound statement. The idea is that the religion is most effective when it is customized to us, to each individual. So Hinduism is a broad religion that you can say many Indians practice. Christianity is a very broad religion that is practiced by many Westerners and also in India and other countries, et cetera, et cetera. But to make our spiritual practice most effective, we should customize that religion. And the best way to customize that religion, our own specific religion, that religion in the depths of our soul, is to expose ourselves to all the different world religions. Because we can take notes, we can learn, oh, this is such a wonderful idea that Christ taught. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Oh, this is such a nice idea from the Quran. Let me try to incorporate it into my own practice. Nowadays, mindfulness is a very popular practice in the West. That's the Buddhist practice. We can take that mindfulness practice and incorporate it into our own spiritual practice. So I think this is what Swami Vivekananda had in mind. And you might ask, well, wait a minute, this sounds like it's a kind of cocktail or some kind of superficial khichdi. It's one of the popular foods that we eat during pujas, that Hindus eat during puja time. A mixture of different things, and that becomes very superficial. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna used to say that if you have a shovel and you start digging in one place in the ground, and after 2 minutes, you get tired and you go 5 feet away and you start digging another hole, he says, you'll never dig a deep hole. And he says, similarly, don't be superficial. You should dig deep, go deep into your own faith. How do we reconcile what Sri Ramakrishna says with what I was just saying about what Swamiji says, that I shall go to the church of the Christians, I should go to the mosques of the Mohammedans? This is how I understand it. The main concept here is ishta nishtha, which means you should have total devotion to your own ishta devata, your own chosen deity. Remember, the first doctrine of Swamiji's Vedanta is that God is one, but appears in many forms. And my Ishta Devata may be different from your Ishta Devata. My Ishta Devata may be Sri Ramakrishna. Yours may be Kali. Another person's may be Christ. Another one's may be Allah. And you should have total devotion toward your Ishta Devata. That's what's called Ishta Nishtha in Sanskrit or in Bengali. As long as you keep that Ishta Nishtha as your foundation in your spiritual practice, then you can feel free to learn from any other religion. Never forget what your foundation is. The foundation is your own Ishta Devata and your own spiritual tradition. But on that basis, you can then practice other religions and learn as much as you can to your heart's content. So that's the second dimension of the cosmopolitanism of the Ramakrishna Mission, the religious and social cosmopolitanism of the Ramakrishna Mission. And I wanted to mention one final dimension. The third dimension has to do with the second part of Swami Vivekananda's motto for the organization. Remember, Atmano Mokshatham Jagadhitaya Cha, for the welfare of humanity. How can we best serve humanity? This is the question. And Swami Vivekananda's cosmopolitan answer to this question is this, that we have to be flexible and we have to be adaptable. We have to adapt our organization and our service to the particular country that we find ourselves in. So our Vedanta societies in the US will have to understand deeply American culture in order to know how to serve Americans best. Our society in South Africa and in Lusaka, Africa, they have to understand African and South African culture to know what their needs are, their country's needs are, so that we can best serve them. And that goes for every single country. We have societies in Australia, in the Philippines, all over the place. And each country has different needs, and we have to serve them accordingly. Many of you probably know that Holy Mother Sharada Devi, she used to say, Jekhane Jamon, Shekhane Temon in Bangla. Bangla is such a wonderful language because you can do a lot of wordplay. And this is a beautiful expression because it's rhyming. Jekhane, Shekhane, Jamon, Temon. Jekhane, Jamon, Shekhane, Temon. And in English, when you try to translate it, you lose the beauty of the language. But in any case, what she means is, wherever you are, you have to adapt yourself to the people around you. In English, there's an expression, when in Rome, behave like a Roman. This is the basic idea, right? In the same way, each one of our organizations, each society, each Vedanta society in each of the countries of the world has to adapt itself to the needs of that particular country. In the late 1890s, Vivekananda, after traveling the entire world, what he realized is that Western countries are extremely wealthy. They don't need material help. They don't need hospitals. They don't need schools. Those things they are already taken care of. What they need is spiritual instruction. So that's what Swamiji emphasized in the West. And he told his brother disciples, and he carved out the mission for future generations along those lines. The opposite is true in India. In India, we have all sorts of spiritual riches, but it's a much poorer country. And there's tremendous poverty during Swamiji's time. There's still a lot of poverty. Of course, there's less poverty now than in the 1890s. But Swamiji said, therefore, in India, one of the priorities, one of the best ways that we can serve our fellow Indians is by building hospitals, dispensaries, schools, colleges, and by serving India in these ways, not just at the spiritual level, but also at the material level. Now, one aspect of the flexibility of the Ramakrishna Mission as an ideal is that times also change. And that might have been true in the 1890s. Now we have to reassess the situation. Now in India, there's a burgeoning middle class. There are more and more people who have a decent salary. Most middle class people now own a home. They have at least one vehicle. They have good jobs. And so we have to ask ourselves, as monks of the Ramakrishna Mission, as also the broader group of devotees in the Ramakrishna tradition, what is the best way to serve India? And we might find that we don't have to emphasize as much the material service as we did 100 years ago. We can emphasize more, spiritual lectures, spiritual retreats, things like that. That's what in the next 3 days, a number of senior swamis who are heads of many of the Vedanta societies in different countries, they'll be speaking on these issues. They'll be talking about the needs of different countries and the way that the Ramakrishna Mission tailors its service to the particular countries throughout the world. And one final point I wanted to make, and then I'd love to hear from the rest of you. Remember the motto, Vivekananda's motto for the order, Atmano Mokshartham Jagadhitaya Cha. The cha in Sanskrit means and, for one's own spiritual liberation and for the welfare of humanity. And the question is, what is the meaning of that cha, that little Sanskrit word and? What does that and mean? I think what Swamiji meant is that the two components of the Ramakrishna Mission motto, Atmano Mokshatam on the one hand and Jagaditaya, are mutually dependent. They're inseparable from one another, which means we cannot truly serve others in a spirit of unselfishness, in a spirit of worship, without doing spiritual practice, without doing regular spiritual practice, which means that we cannot help the world. We cannot help the world without doing our own regular spiritual practice. Vice versa, on the other hand, we ourselves cannot make spiritual progress if we only care about our own liberation, if we only care about our own spiritual progress. We also have to be unselfish. We have to think about others, and we have to try to serve others as best we can. I hope that most of you are familiar with this amazing incident. A few years before Sri Ramakrishna left his body, he was speaking to Naren, the future Swami Vivekananda, and Swamiji told Sri Ramakrishna, he said, please bless me so that I can just immerse myself all day in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, in the highest state of Advaita, and I can just come down to the relative plane once in a while to eat a few morsels of food, and then I'll go back into Samadhi. And Sri Ramakrishna scolded him severely, and he said, I thought you would be like a great banyan tree, giving shade to thousands, hundreds of thousands, but now I see you're selfish. You care only about your own liberation. And that scolding, that affected Swamiji so deeply that I believe that that's one of the things that was behind this motto of the Ramakrishna Mission, Atmano Mokshatam Jagadhitayacha. And in fact, in a very beautiful letter he wrote in 1897 to Mary Hale, one of his American friends, he said, I have lost all wish for my salvation. May I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries so that I may worship the only God that exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls. And above all, my God, the wicked, my God, the miserable, my God, the poor of all races, of all species, is the special object of my worship. Let us pray to the Holy Trio, Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother Sharada Devi, and Swami Vivekananda, that each one of us can become a spiritual cosmopolitan by learning from religions throughout the world and learning from cultures and countries throughout the world, and so that we can realize God in this very life. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
It was an excellent presentation, Medhananji. We are very happy and we'll be glad to welcome you here. Maybe we can have a few sessions here as well. We have a little time, so I'll just see if there are some questions in the chat. I'll read out the questions. If anybody wants to ask questions based on the talk Swami Medhananda delivered just now, please limit yourself to the topic he discussed. So you can go ahead and type in the chat box. I'll read it out for him and he'll be very glad to answer your questions. Yeah, there's one remark. One Srila Banerjee from UK writes, what a wonderful way to say it. Vedanta offers the infrastructure for all world religions. And she says, we need to include this concept of what is Vedanta in all school and college curricula all over the world. I hope it happens, but it will meet with a lot of opposition, obviously. So this is just a comment. I'm waiting for a question. If somebody, so maybe till somebody types a question, you can answer how it could be, how attempts could be made to include this universal idea. I mean, the concept that Vedanta can form the basis. So if you can just highlight.
I think Suk, somebody named Suk has asked a question.
Suk has asked, why did Swami Vivekananda specifically decide to go to the US and UK as opposed to other countries? I mean, he went to Europe also.
Yes.
Anyway,
yes, he visited. He visited a number of other countries. Maharaj mentioned he also visited Switzerland. He visited Netherlands and many other countries, Germany also. But why did he visit the US? Well, I think that part of the reason is because, first of all, he had heard about this World's Parliament of Religions, which is, I mean, this was a very, very pioneering conference assembling delegates of all the world religions in one place. And so he understood, number one, that the US was this up and coming country. Remember, it was a new country at the time. The Civil War was just a couple decades before, you know, a few decades before he came in 1893. And he knew that the country was ripe for, there was a spiritual hunger in that country. And the country was so wealthy and there's such a vast global network that whatever he would say and do in the US would make a global impact. So I think that's at least part of the reason. That also is true of UK. Of course, the British were the colonial rulers of India at that time. So it was massively powerful as a country at that time. And so that's part of the reason, I think. How could he asked himself, how can I make the greatest global impact in the shortest amount of time? And US and UK were the logical choices. That it seems to me that would be a short answer.
Yeah. There's one more question now. Can it not be seen as a uniqueness of Ramakrishna Dev and Swamiji's outlook that India should be uplifted as well as the world also must be regenerated spiritually? Yes, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that's what I'm saying. I hope that's what I said in the lecture, that he's not, that the Atmano Mokshatam Jagat Hichayatya, the Jagat obviously includes India, but it encompasses the entire world. The mistake some people make is to think that Ramakrishna Mission is just an Indian organization or just a Hindu organization. It's not that. It's a much more universal organization. It's a global cosmopolitan organization.
Yeah, and we have a last question now. Naturally, this is a very hot topic. What would be Swamiji's position regarding Ukraine in the context of cosmopolitanism?
That's an interesting question. I'm not an expert in geopolitics, so I don't think I can give a great answer. And I wish if Swamiji was here, we could ask him. Of course, one general thing we can say is that ahimsa is paramo dharma. It's one of the most important things that we have to practice as spiritual aspirants. Ahimsa, non-injury to all creatures. And the kinds of things the kind of violence that's being perpetrated in Ukraine, of course, is unthinkable. And that would never be something Swami Vivekananda would have supported or endorsed. And no doubt he would have probably asked some of the Swamis of the Ramakrishna Mission to go out to Ukraine or to somehow help Ukraine, however they can, whether with funds or even going there directly and serving the people who are in need, people who are injured and who need help. Yeah, so that's I think the general approach that he would take, I think. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's one remark, or maybe he has conveyed his thanks, somebody from South Africa. So thank you, Maharaj. I'll just read. Okay, then there's one more question before I come to the comments. He says, the South African gentleman, Naresh, says, thank you, Maharaj, for expanding on the universal principles and ideals of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. That's all. So that's a remark. And there's one question. Ultimately, everything merges in the path of knowledge or jnana. So isn't jnana our ultimate need?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So the thing is, in Indian languages like Sanskrit and Bangla and Hindi, jnana is ambiguous. It can mean different things in different contexts. Jnana yoga usually means, in the Indian context, the yoga practiced by Advaita Vedantins, which is a very specific path. Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. We should listen to the Mahavakya taught by a qualified guru, Tat Tvam Asi, you are that Brahman. And then we should reflect on that teaching, and then we should meditate on it, and then we should attain knowledge of Brahman. But the thing is, in the Upanishads, in the Bhagavad Gita, when it talks about jnana, what it means is knowledge of God. It's not just talking about jnana yoga. The knowledge means knowledge of God. Even bhaktas, the goal for bhaktas is also knowledge of God. That's something you have to keep in mind. Jnana is not the goal only of jnana yoga. It's the goal of all of the yogas. It's the goal of bhakti yoga. It's the goal of karma yoga. It's the goal of raja yoga. And we can attain knowledge of the ultimate reality through any of the yogas. This is the thing to keep in mind. So as long as we define jnana as knowledge of God, which is just another way of saying God realization, then we can embrace all of the yogas, not just jnana yoga, but any of the yogas and all of the world religions. They're equally effective in taking us to the goal of knowledge of God or God realization. Thank you.
So one more last question, unless of course there is one more. Swami Satyashanji is still not online. So we can have one more question. In view of what has been just discussed, what would Swamiji's position be specifically on religious conversions?
Yeah, this is another really interesting question. So this is my 2 cents on this. See, if we go back to the first generation, the second generation of Sri Ramakrishna's, of the Ramakrishna tradition, there was a great Swami named Swami Atulanandaji. He was a European. And I believe he was raised in a Christian household. Now, the thing is, it's not that anybody came to him, not like none of Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciples came to Atulanandaji and said, you should become a Hindu, nothing like that. But remember that Hindus believe in rebirth and they believe in karma, which means that even if you belong to a particular religion in this life, even if you're a Christian or a Hindu, it doesn't mean that you were a Christian in your previous life. A Hindu in this life may have been a Christian in a previous birth. A Muslim in this life may have been a Christian in a previous birth. If we keep that broad view in mind, then we can take a broader approach to this question about religious conversion. So remember, Swamiji says each one of us has a religion, a customized religion in the depths of our soul. And it might be that the religion that we were born into in this life doesn't correspond well to the religion in my soul. And in that case, once I start learning about other religions, I might feel naturally drawn toward some other religion, the religion that I was not born into. It happens sometimes. In the case of Atulanandaji, we have monks now who were raised in a Christian household, some who were born in raised in a Jaina household, some who were raised in a Muslim household. Why did they join the Ramakrishna Mission as sannyasis? Because they have these purva janma samskaras from previous lives, most likely, right? So I don't think Swami Vivekananda would have approved of forcible religious conversions. The idea that my religion is superior to all the rest. During Swamiji's time in the late 1800s, Christian missionaries were rampant in India, and they had this superiority complex. We have to forcibly convert the heathen Hindus to see the light of Jesus, because the Hindu religion is inferior to the Christian religion. He didn't like this attitude because it's a kind of fanaticism. But we should be flexible, and we should remember that this is a journey of many lives, and that we should try to practice the religion in the depths of our soul. And sometimes that means practicing a religion that is different from the religion that we were born into. That's the short answer. So some people can very logically change from the religion they were born into to a different religion. There's nothing wrong with that. But forcing other people to convert to other religions is not at all accepted in our tradition.
Okay. Thank you, Maharaj, for your wonderful session. Many people have expressed their gratitude for your wonderful thoughts. You have given a lot of food for thought, and I hope they try to understand the subject more deeply. And if they get a chance, they should definitely read your 2 books, the first book on Sri Ramakrishna and the second on Vivekananda, both published by Oxford University Press. I think many more ideas will be more clear if you just go through those books. So thank you once again for your wonderful session. And we will now be asking Swami Satyeshanand ji is already online.